hello, and welcome back to WTF is AuDHD with Ellie and Paige. We're two late diagnosed sisters with autism and ADHD. We were diagnosed late.
And we're here to educate.
Yeah. Hi there. Today's episode, we're going to be finally climbing into AuDHD and what AuDHD is, and basically the whole entire point of this podcast and what the podcast is actually called.
The podcast.
The podcast. The point of this podcast is our personal experiences living with AuDHD, which is the combination of autism and ADHD. We've met the criteria in the DSM-5 for both autism and also ADHD.
Well, me still pending the finale diagnoses, but
Yeah, actually, have you heard anything about that?
no, you follow that one up, hey?
Yeah, it's a bit slow, eh?
It is a bit slow. I'm gonna have to follow that one up, but that is crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy. So basically, we were just chatting off mic before this, and this is probably one of the first episodes where I'm actually a little bit like struggling to put my thoughts into words, because there's so many thoughts I have, first of all, that are hard to communicate, but secondly, this is our experience of life since we were younger, and we've only obviously recently discovered what these contradictions actually were.
Yeah.
And so I feel almost paralyzed, which is kind of just a metaphor for my whole life. Yeah, this is quite an interesting topic to broach, because autism and ADHD, as I've previously mentioned, they were not able to be diagnosed together up until 2013. They deemed them...
That is crazy.
It is crazy. They deemed them to be completely different, mutually exclusive conditions that you could not have both. But then in 2013, they finally added it to the DSM-5 as a joint diagnosis, because they realized that there were so many people overlapping.
Yeah.
And the fact that there are people that can have both.
Yeah.
So we're coming in with very limited research on this. This is like 12 years of actual research. And again, the point of our podcast, because we want to tell our story of growing up with it and living with it, and hope that it just adds to the pool of research in the atmosphere.
I think like one reason why it's like kind of easier to talk about ADHD and autism separately is because obviously, well, there's just been more research on both of them for one, but two, because there's more content online and you relate to things, you watch a video and like, oh my God, I do that. And so it's more seeped into our brains kind of. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you find people that experience the same things and you relate to them, whereas this hasn't been spoken about as much, I don't think.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So we're trying to be some of the first, or there are many that have gone before us, but like we're trying to add to the group of people who are talking about this condition. And so
because we need to, because it's actually quite in our brains quite torturous.
It is. AuDHD, the term is actually not officially a diagnosis in the DSM-5. It's just you've been diagnosed with autism and you've also been diagnosed with ADHD. AuDHD is almost like a colloquial term, but in saying that, AuDHD is its own experience. It's its own neurotype. It's not necessarily someone has ADHD and someone has autism. It's actually a third style of brain.
Yes, and this is why as well, like, because we are talking about ADHD from the lens of AuDHD, like our experience is actually AuDHD, but we're talking to ADHD and we're talking to autism. This is why some people might not relate to this in our experiences, because
they're different conditions, and when they interact with each other, they manifest in further different behaviors that don't relate to just autism or just ADHD.
Yeah, this is really basically put, but like say like, we talk about how we actually are quite, we do come across sometimes quite extroverted. We're really not. But someone that's, extremely autistic might struggle to relate to that because they're not like that at all.
Yeah.
So I think, it's, I don't know what I'm saying.
Cheers. There you go. It's just an example of losing your train of thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're going to actually split this topic into 2 episodes to begin with. There will be more, as we always say. There's always going to be more later down the track where we dive into specific traits. But this will be split into 2 episodes, and this episode here is basically going to be more about what it is, what AuDHD is, and why it's misunderstood, and why it's been misdiagnosed,
and why it
years.
Can be so hard to pick up. Well, because we have no research, but like it is quite hard to see because
the two conditions kind of mask each other out.
Yes.
And often AuDHD people and autistic people who have both end up looking neurotypical.
Yeah, it's funny.
It's really weird.
But then it's just all in your mind that's going chaotic and
exactly
that wants order but is chaotic.
Yeah, exactly. So AuDHD can be really hard to spot and diagnose. Hence why I think me and you were diagnosed so late. And even then we were quite early in comparison to the generations before us.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of our parents and grandparents who would have been AuDHD and we didn't know that they were. However, they may have been diagnosed with other conditions. And that's something we'll get into in this episode as well. What conditions can often be misdiagnosed for.
Or like appear to be, but is actually AuDHD at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things, first of all, is that both conditions can have executive function issues, and that's why they can get confused for each other. Both conditions can have sensory issues and stuff like that, but often autism may be more sensory avoiding, like I've said before, and ADHD can be more sensory seeking.
Yeah, and I'm such an anomaly now. Is that the word?
Yeah.
Not anomaly.
Yeah, I think that's the word.
Well, I guess this is a contradiction that I'm getting straight into, but like I am a sensory seeker, but then I am a sensory avoider.
Yeah. And it's so confusing.
So confusing.
And it's confusing for others as well, I think, because we look like we're really hyperactive, but then what they don't see is that we go home and we're like shut in our room for like 2 hours afterwards because we've been so overstimulated. Because our ADHD went out there and went crazy.
Yeah.
And then we get home and our autism's like, what just happened?
Yeah, and I think I saw someone comment, and I've seen this already, that it's we could look introverted/extroverted, which we are, and the term is ambiverted. Is that right?
Yeah.
Ambiverted.
Yeah. Ambivert.
Yes, which is us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And
But really, I'm definitely probably more what do you call it? Introvert, yeah.
Yeah. One of the biggest things in my life has been a really awful state of paralysis constantly, all the time. And it's been something that Paige picked up on me years ago and always found quite frustrating to watch, right?
Yeah, and deal with. Before I knew, sorry, this is how it's crap though.
Yeah.
It's like, it's frustrating for people who experience this, and it appears in certain ways and manifests in certain human behavior. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And really, it's not their fault.
No.
Now I know it's not your fault. And I'm like, oh, there was a reason for that.
Yeah.
But it was frustrating because I didn't know.
No, yeah, exactly. I've always had issues with, I am seeking stimulation, excitement, and novelty, and I want to do something. I want to do it. But first of all, my ADHD can sometimes stop the motivation. But really, I find what's really stopping me from doing things often is autistic people or autism craves sameness and routine and knowing what to expect. So I've always had a fear of the unknown, and now I know that that's actually probably related predominantly to my autism, where I don't want to step into an area that I don't know or I can't predict.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that my ADHD wants to go do that, and sometimes it wins, but then I end up suffering later. Or I want to go and do that, but I can't because I'm just stuck in the middle going, no, but what if, no, can't do that. Overthink. Unpredictable, and it means I end up doing nothing at all.
Yeah. So Ellie is just constantly in a state of paralysis. I think you're better now that we know, and now that you're, medicated. And, but yeah, no, you're just in a constant state of paralysis and can't make decisions.
Yeah. The indecisiveness, I think, is actually a huge part of ADHD. I think that's something that is very common, because what's happening is you've essentially got two different brains in one. And so you've got one side of your brain saying, don't do that, do this. And then the other side's going, nah, don't do that, do this. And then you just end up doing nothing because you become so overwhelmed, so overstimulated that it's easier to just go and have a nap.
Yeah, it's literally two little things on your shoulders, like in a movie.
It's like the angel devil.
It's like, it's like this fight in your brain and you can't control it, and it's really frustrating, and it causes a lot of anxiety and overwhelm, and then people feel like, well, I felt like I wasn't ever achieving anything in life because, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like hard to get ahead when I feel like I'm like like a yo-yo.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just never moving really. I'm just sidestepping kind of.
Yeah.
And going, I want this. No, I don't. Wait. 3 weeks ago, I felt like doing this, and now I don't want to do this at all, and I want to do the complete opposite of what I said 3 weeks ago.
Yeah,
and I think that's probably also to do with my hormones interacting too.
Yeah,
that's a whole other.
This is another thing. Is like, I mean, I don't know the science, but I know that women obviously go through a lot of hormonal fluctuations throughout the month.
Yeah.
And so ADHD is really hard with the menstrual cycle, man.
Yeah, it is.
We've struggled a lot with that. And before knowing what it was, like, man, it was really hard. One thing I'll just add to that is the one thing that I really struggle with, and it gets really bad with my hormones, is I love routine. I want order. I want routine. I want everything clean. I thrive off that. And I'll manage to stick to a routine that I'll implement for like a week. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I freaking stick to this. And I'm thriving. Something happens. And now in hindsight, I'm like, maybe it was a big estrogen drop.
Yeah.
You know, like now that I know how that affects women with ADHD and autism, like PMDD, which is talked about that in the last episode. Or whenever that was.
2 episodes ago.
2 episodes ago. Now I'm like looking back and going, that must be when I had a huge estrogen drop and then I lose all routine, all the order's gone and it's just chaos.
Yeah.
And I beat myself up. I'm like, why can't you stick to a routine? Why can't you stick to anything? Like, and the
cycle continues.
The cycle continues. It's been my life. And the self-hate chat just keeps coming.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I'm sort of, I'm similar, but almost the opposite, where like I actually struggle to set up the systems in the first place. So I'm craving some order and routine and I just want everything to be predictable and I want to know what to do and how to do it and why. But my ADHD messiness can't even put those structures into place. So I constantly feel overwhelmed, annoyed at myself, and just frustrated that I can't get anything done because I can't make a routine. And even if I did, I can't stick to it.
Yeah.
But I need it.
Yeah.
So it's this horrible thing. And that's why sometimes for me, going into a full-time job and being forced into an office is good for me because it provides structure and it makes me just do things. But on the other hand, I then get completely overwhelmed. I can't stick with it and my mental health suffers again.
Yeah.
And then if I'm working from home and I've got my own flexibility to like have my own routine and structure, I then struggle to keep motivated. And so it's just this constant like,
yo-yo of torture, to be honest.
Yeah, I want to be working from home so I can predict my environment and feel safe and do what I want to do when I want to do it. But then my ADHD gets distracted and seeks novelty. And so then I go into an office and try and meet the external expectations. And then I get completely overwhelmed and end up having really poor mental health because my autism can't deal with it.
Yeah.
So that's been like my whole life. I'm never happy. Like that sounds grim.
Yeah, the grass is always greener.
But yeah, the grass is always greener. It always feels that way. It's like, no, right now this is bad. I should be doing that over there. Then I'll change my environment and I hate that because I actually miss that element. It's so confusing.
It's so confusing and torturous in your brain.
It really is.
Yeah. And someone that doesn't get it and will hear this just won't get it.
Yeah.
That's what's frustrating as well. We're talking about how it's like just invisible. And if you haven't experienced it, you don't understand. And so like I just feel like when we talk about this out loud, the people that will get it and resonate with us hard. But some people that see this will just be like, oh, it just sounds like an excuse. And that's what's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Because we're not lazy. We're not all the labels that we're called. We have a literal physiological like battle going on in our brains that we're trying to keep under control, and it's just really hard.
Yeah. Like one of the things that overlaps in both is executive function issues. And that's like task management, task initiation, planning, short-term memory, and all that kind of stuff. Both ADHD and autism have these things. ADHD is more about not being able to execute the task and like plan it together, whereas autism is more about a complete overwhelm with too much coming at you at once. So then we've got both happening. So our executive function has like a double whammy of not being able to work properly, and it's very confusing. This is another reason why I think historically, because you couldn't diagnose AuDHD, it was only ever autism or ADHD, you were first of all diagnosed with the one that you had the most symptoms of. So it was like predominantly you're autistic, and so you'd be autistic or ADHD. But I believe that a lot of, and some research backs this up, a lot of people in the past and still to this day are being misdiagnosed with stuff. So there are two conditions in particular that I believe often are misdiagnosed. The first one is bipolar disorder. It's a legit diagnosis and it exists. However, this is how AuDHD could look like bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
You've got 4 weeks where you're just manic and you're driven by your ADHD. Novelty, you're hyperfixated on something.
You found something that you're passionate about, you're hyperfixated on it. Woohoo.
Yeah, let's go. So it can look like mania. And just intense, not sleeping, staying out really late, working on a project. So that's your ADHD.
That's me.
Yeah, totally. Chasing. after that X amount of time, however it lasts, however long it lasts.
Because that's only sustainable for so long.
Exactly, because you don't eat properly, you don't
sleep properly, yeah.
None of your self-care is happening in those 4 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever it is. Then you end up in complete burnout straight afterwards and depression, which then looks like hiding in your room, not talking to anyone. That's often the autism as well, being burnt out, and your body just being exhausted and going, oh, I don't want anything now. I'm too overstimulated.
Yeah.
And then you withdraw for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So that could look like bipolar.
Yeah.
For sure. I'm not saying they're completely identical, but I think that they do get misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
And so if you have been diagnosed with bipolar, it could be legit.
Yeah.
Legit diagnosis. But also, maybe it wasn't.
And that's if your ADHD and autistic symptoms are really overt. Whereas someone like you, Ellie, yours are very internal, and therefore I do think there's either like some ADHD people getting misdiagnosed with bipolar, as you say, or people who don't show it outwardly and are in the state of paralysis where they don't ever get picked up because it's not showing outwardly.
No, you actually almost appear neurotypical
because
it's so internal.
Yeah.
So I've always just got away with looking completely normal because I didn't really look autistic. I didn't really look ADHD because both were hiding each other.
Look, in quotation marks.
Yeah. That was all in my brain. So I was missed. So, for example, like my ADHD in a social situation, novelty seeks and gets dopamine from like connecting with people or making people laugh or there's lots of different things I can do in social situations that's from my ADHD that makes me appear like an extrovert. But really, that's just completely hiding my autism and therefore you get missed.
Yeah.
That's very common, I think, for people with AuDHD. Both conditions can mask each other. Also, there's certain things that look like they overlap. Like I was talking about the executive function before. They both ADHD and autism have that issue, but they are different causes and why. Another thing is like people can confuse stimming with hyperactivity in physical behavior. So like I will always be, as I've spoken before, I like rub my forehead, sniff my fingers. That's stimming. That's a self-regulatory behavior where I'm trying to calm my nervous system down. But then also playing with my hair, the texture of my hair is soothing me. But on the other hand, this is also a hyperactive move I'm doing. So it's actually both, but they look the same.
On the other hand?
Wait, what?
No, you said on the other hand. I'm just making a really dry joke.
Classic.
Wait, where's your other hand?
Classic.
Oh my God, let's cut that out.
We're keeping it. But yeah, on the other side of it, this is actually a hyperactivity behavior that I would do in like class to keep my concentration on. So often people with ADHD concentrate better when their brain's being stimulated elsewhere.
In some other way.
E.g. listening to music or playing with a ball. They've actually done research on this. Guy Williams, who's a comedian in New Zealand, him and his sister are both ADHD. They just did a doco about this. And as soon as they were playing with something, their brain function actually improved because they could listen more and take more info in because their brain was being distracted by something else. So for me playing with my hair is actually both a stimming behavior and also a hyperactivity behavior.
Yeah.
And that's why they can look the same.
Yeah, mine's blasting music.
Yeah.
That you really love.
Yeah. And I grew up with that. It's very nice. Yeah.
Very nice.
Very nice. So yeah, the other thing that people often misdiagnose ADHD for is borderline personality disorder. And borderline personality disorder, I don't know a huge amount about it. I've not done a huge amount of research on it, but it's basically affiliated to like extreme moods and a lack of emotional regulation. Those are two just small factors of it. But they often then also get misdiagnosed with BPD when it may actually just be AuDHD because both ADHD and autism both have issues regulating emotions.
Yeah. And obviously not always the case, but definitely this is true. Like we've seen so many comments. Have you seen so many comments about people saying this? Like, was diagnosed with BPD at 21, blah, 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 got to 40 years old and have now been diagnosed with AuDHD. Yeah. And it's just like,
Yeah. If you're listening and you've been diagnosed with bipolar or borderline personality disorder and you've had this gut feeling that it's actually not the right diagnosis, maybe consider looking into autism and ADHD or AuDHD because it could be that. And because we didn't have this label up until 12 years ago, it's hugely likely that so many people have been misdiagnosed with that because there was no other criteria it fit, but it kind of went, oh yeah, that's kind of bipolar-y. we'll just diagnose them with that. Again, we're not dismissing those diagnoses though.
They do exist. Yeah. Wow. James.
Wow, my God.
Stop it.
Stop it. Mental health is also a thing that really gets impacted, I believe, by the experience of AuDHD. One, because it's a lonely experience and like it's very young research once again. But secondly, because the two are so contradictory, the two conditions, they feel contradictory, it can cause really poor mental health and inner turmoil and inner battling. In the next episode, we will talk about the contradictions of these two conditions, but we want to save that for its own episode because that's actually quite an interesting conversation on its own. But mental health issues, as we've spoken about before, can rise up due to a simmering, undiagnosed AuDHD brain.
Yeah, the anxiety and depression. Like the burnout can look like depression and it feels like depression. And the anxiety comes from not being able to initiate tasks and finish tasks when you need to, and the procrastination and the stress that comes from that.
And feeling overwhelmed. Yeah. And the depression I had in my 20s was definitely burnout. Yeah. And I think it was I believe when I was younger, my ADHD was possibly more overt than my autism. But when I say those two things, I mean the traits and my behaviors. I think I appeared more ADHD, but even then compared to you, I didn't. But I think my ADHD really overpowered me in my youth. And so I was able to go out and drink alcohol and have fun and novelty seek and seek dopamine through relationships and people and blah, 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 blah. As I'm getting older and also discovering what it is, my autism is so much more predominant now.
Yes. Oh my God, I feel that so hard.
Yeah. And I actually think maybe I am more autistic in general, but societally to fit in, I masked that so much through my ADHD that now I'm really just my true self and I never felt like I could be.
This is the thing. Yeah. You start to unmask because you realize what it is and then Yeah. I think the lonely are you right?
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking. Yeah.
Thought you were about to fucking cry. Which
really
is fine.
Tough. Nah. Yeah.
The loneliness for me, I actually talked about this in the last year. The loneliness side and the anxiety side for me around like friendships, as I already mentioned it, but my ADHD wants to do lots of fun things with friends and go out for brunches and do this and go for hikes and woo, like with people because I do yearn for that. But the other, obviously, brain, my autistic side or my introverted brain, again, finds it extremely overwhelming. So that's kind of that, I think, because when I say that I yearn for connection but struggle in social situations, someone that's just autistic and extremely introverted might not relate to that because they're like, oh, what do you mean? I love being on my own at all times and I would be fine if I was the last human on earth.
Yeah.
But that's where mine comes in. Yeah. It's like wanting that so much, but then not
being able
to do it. And just being in this really sad place.
Yeah, totally. I was able to do it. This is kind of probably the difference between us. When I was younger, I was able to do that quite well and almost too well. Like I've perfected people and social skills to a scary degree.
Yeah.
And the cost that that's now had for me is absolute burnout and not actually having the connections that I might have looked like I had.
Yeah.
Like it's actually been quite a lonely place for me too. It just wasn't as obvious.
Well, yeah. And also it kind of appears to some people that you're not a bad friend, but like you've fallen off the wagon and it's like, oh, she's clearly not my friend anymore. And it's like, that's actually not the case.
No.
I love friends who I can go 5 years without seeing and know that they're still there and that I'm still there for them and I love them and vice versa, but that nothing changes.
Yeah.
But I think some people, have different standards of friendships and that's totally fair. So people sometimes just assume that, oh, we mustn't be, And then you find out the hard way by seeing that they're having their baby shower or something and not being invited.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, and that's a lonely place too.
Exactly. Because I always feel that all my friends are just as close to me as they always were.
Yeah.
No matter how much time went by.
Yeah.
But obviously other people don't feel that because it's time invested. And that's so fair. Like I actually am so patient with that. But there have been friends in the past where I would have thought that I might be invited to something because I would have invited them to mine.
Yeah.
Whatever it might be. Like it might be a wedding or it might be a baby shower, like you say. But I then have this like really horrible like taste of reality where I'm like, well, yeah, I guess not. I guess I haven't spoken to them for a while and fair enough. Like,
but it's still really lonely because I think we have a different, me and you, I'll speak for we have a different language of friendship.
Yeah.
So that's a real tough place.
Yeah.
And the anxieties around friendships.
Yeah. Because also with ADHD and autism, I don't fully relate to, this is a generalization, but I don't fully relate to someone who's just autistic, and I don't relate to someone who's just ADHD.
Yeah.
Because I actually find people who are just ADHD sometimes can be too much for me. This is in quotation marks.
Like too
Not too much.
overwhelming
Yeah,
for you.
just full on, and like love them to bits. I love people who have ADHD, and I want to kiss and hug them. However, in terms of actually maintaining a friendship with them, I struggle with that because there's actually half of me that wants the opposite. But then in terms of someone who might only be autistic, again, I don't fully relate to them because I'm probably too full on for them.
Yeah.
It's so confusing.
No,
So I need to find people who have both autism and ADHD.
Yeah.
But we're yet to discover many of these people.
Yeah.
We don't actually know who has it because it's not being diagnosed and it's not being talked about enough. Hence why we're doing this podcast.
I know. There's been like a few people that me and you, like, we've met in the past and we're like, oh my God, I love that person. Oh my God, they're just so cool. Like, we just click. And then we've like later found out that they're also ADHD and we're like, oh my God. Like, it's literally just like an understanding without saying anything. And you're like, God, I love this person.
Yeah.
And then it comes out later and you're like, yeah, that really checks out for that one.
Yeah, that tracks. Yeah.
So like we can kind of pick them.
Yeah, we
now.
can. A lot of my friends and even my partner, Sam, he was diagnosed with ADHD after I was, because I looked at him and went, hold on a minute, what the bloody hell's going on here? And he's ADHD. And so many of my closest friends have been like diagnosed with ADHD.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's right. They're my best friend.
That's crazy. Yeah.
So yeah, even just the friendships can be hard because again, we can appear really hot and cold. Like 1 minute I'm like full on into this like friendship and I obsess over it. And then like 3 weeks later, I haven't talked to them. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to them for like 3 weeks. But
Object permanence, like you, like out of sight, out of mind kind of, but like you love them.
Exactly. But that's why it probably looks like I don't like them anymore. But then it's not true.
I know. It's sad.
It's really hard. And often even in social situations, I'd go to a party and I'd meet someone and I'm very personable and I'm good and I at like talking and I enjoy actually learning about people because I'm actually, my special interest is actually people. So when I'm
human
talking to people,
behavior.
yeah, oh my gosh. And that's, I think, why another reason I've worked out how to like fit in, because I've studied people my whole life.
And also you went to uni and studied psychology, which kind of just says that you just,
Yeah. So when I'm talking to people and I'm asking lots of questions about them, I'm genuinely interested and I am kind of info seeking and learning about them. But sometimes people take that as, oh my gosh, this person really cares about me. Ellie really cares about me. We should catch up and hang out. And then I absolutely freak the F out.
Oh my God,
because I'm like, oh my gosh, I really like them too. And I do. But I almost give off a false sense of like closeness to people initially because I'm genuinely just interested in them. And then I then later freak out because I don't actually want that close connection or it's too much for me and it's really scary.
No, yes. Oh my God, I relate. Well,
Yeah.
I'm not as like, you know.
No, but yeah.
No, I get that though. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real contradiction because in the moment my ADHD and my interest is really into that person. And then later on, I'm like, oh my God. And then they might text me and say, we should get coffee. And I'm like, that's really nice. And like, I really would love to, but that sounds like a nightmare. Yeah. Not because of you as a person, but because of the situation as a whole. Yeah. And so again, it's so confusing for me internally and for us to then explain to people.
Because people don't get it. If you don't get it and you don't experience it, it's so hard to explain.
So hard to explain, yeah. So that's kind of like a basic episode on like what AuDHD is. Again,
and we did touch on a few contradictions, but
we did. That'll be the next episode. But it's a unique experience. It's a neurotype we've only really just discovered 12 years ago. So keep listening and also share your experiences with us because we're trying to add to the pool of research here by just sharing our story because there's a lack of research out there.
Yeah, 12 years ago, so in 2018, right?
What?
I'm just trying to make the gag that like, far out, I can't believe 2013 was 12 years ago.
Crazy.
You know? I think about like, oh yeah, a couple years ago it was 2020.
Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh.
No.
But yeah, so if you just keep give us info. If you are AuDHD or you suspect it, you know, comment on our videos on social or we've got our Google form you can fill out in our link tree to ask questions or even just tell us about yourself.
Yeah.
We're really kind of trying to gather info here to see like, what is the AuDHD experience? Like who relates to it and how does it really manifest differently from ADHD and just autism? A couple of creators that could be cool for you to follow. I've mentioned her before, but Ellie Middleton, she's an AuDHD creator. She has a book called Unmasked. And then she's just released another book called How to Be You, I think it's what it's called. They're quite good resources. There's also a couple of TED Talks done by a doctor called Karam Sadiq. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. He is an AuDHD psychiatrist, psychologist. And he's got quite a few TED Talks online about AuDHD and the experience. He calls it order versus anarchy, which is exactly what it is.
Fantastic.
Yeah, you want order, but it's anarchy inside your brain.
And
That is such a good way to explain it. So if you ever want to get more info about that, then he's got quite a few TED Talks online. I think he's got a book as well you could look into. And Sam on YouTube, she is a creator who is late diagnosed AuDHD. She's got quite a few cool videos you can watch. There's a few of hers of what I kind of watched in my very early days of thinking I could be autistic. But yeah, thank you for listening to this ep. Hopefully it's been interesting. It's more just been about our experience and what AuDHD kind of is. But like
sometimes people, because there hasn't been much research on this, like the AuDHD, like our experiences kind of are how people got to learn these days. But like to start with.
Yeah, well, to
get the conversation going on, to get more research, because I feel like,
I only figured all this out from other creators talking about it. And also sometimes people who have ADHD and then get medicated for it, it then shows your autism. That's what happened to me.
Have you seen that meme? Oh my God. It's like the video and it's got like James Franco in it at the end. And the main character, he's like this guy walking across the street and it's like, get my ADHD diagnosis, but something doesn't quite add up. And then he turns around and James Franco's like smiling and then it's got like autism. And it's so true. It's so like, true. Something doesn't quite fit in this puzzle. And what is it? And then you figure out, oh my God, autism. It's the missing piece. Like everything makes sense now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it definitely happened to me. I definitely noticed that I could be autistic after being medicated and treated for ADHD. So keep listening. Thank you for being here. Give us a rating on your podcast app if you're enjoying this. Let us know what you would like us to talk about. And next episode, we'll talk more about AuDHD and the contradictions of the two conditions and why it can be so hard to deal with, live with, and explain to people.
It's so hard.
It's really hard.
It's really hard.
Yeah. But thank you once again. We'll see you next episode.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye now.